I'm 76 years old now, and if you had asked me 5 years ago what the hardest part of aging was, I would have answered without hesitation: living alone. Living alone meant eating dinner at a table set for one. It meant hearing the refrigerator hum because there was no other voice in the house. It meant watching couples walk hand in hand through the grocery store while I pushed my cart alone. After my husband passed away, I spent more than a decade building a life that looked peaceful on the outside. And most days, it was. But there were nights when the silence felt heavy, nights when I wished someone was sitting across from me, asking how my day had been. Then I met Richard. He was kind, thoughtful, funny in the quiet way older men often are. He fixed things around my house without being asked. He remembered details from our conversations. And when he looked at me, I felt seen again. So, when he suggested that maybe we should spend more time together, it didn't sound unreasonable. When he hinted that living under the same roof might make life easier for both of us, it sounded comforting. I thought I was opening my door to companionship. What I didn't realize was that I was slowly giving away the very things I had spent years rebuilding: my freedom, my peace, and my sense of self. If you're a woman living alone after 60, I need you to stay with me until the end of this story, because living alone was difficult, but letting him move in was far worse. And before we begin, please subscribe to the channel and join our community. The stories shared here may help you avoid mistakes that many of us learned the hard way. For a long time, I believed that loneliness was my biggest enemy. Not grief, not aging, not even the aches and pains that seemed to arrive with every birthday after 70. It was the empty chair across the dinner table, the quiet house at night, the feeling that nobody would notice if I spent an entire day without speaking to another human being. After my husband died, people worried about me constantly. Are you doing okay? Don't you get lonely? You should find someone. At first, I resisted those conversations. I told everyone I was fine, and most of the time, I truly was. I had my routines. I enjoyed my garden. I volunteered twice a week at the local library. I met friends for coffee. I learned how to enjoy my own company. But loneliness is strange. It doesn't arrive every day. It waits for the vulnerable moments. It shows up on rainy evenings, on holidays, on birthdays, on those nights when the house feels just a little too quiet. That's when Richard entered my life. He wasn't dramatic or charming in the way movies portray romance. He was simply present. He called when he said he would call. He remembered the stories I told him. He asked about my grandchildren. When my kitchen faucet started leaking, he spent an afternoon fixing it. When my car battery died, he showed up before I even finished asking for help. After years of doing everything myself, having someone reliable nearby felt comforting. Looking back now, I can see that I slowly began confusing two very different things: love and relief. Love is about connection. Relief is about escaping discomfort. At the time, I couldn't tell the difference. I wasn't falling in love with Richard as much as I was falling in love with the idea of not being alone anymore. That distinction matters more than most people realize, because when you're lonely, almost any company can feel like companionship. Any attention can feel like affection. Any warm presence can start to look like a solution. I remember sitting in my living room one evening, listening to Richard talk about his day. I felt comforted simply because there was another voice in the room, and that's when the mistake began. I wasn't asking whether this man truly belonged in my life. I was asking whether he could fill an empty space. Those are two completely different questions. Unfortunately, I didn't understand that until much later. At first, Richard wasn't moving in. At least, that's what I told myself. He was simply staying over more often. One night became two. 2 nights became weekends. Weekends became entire weeks. It happened so gradually that I never noticed the moment the arrangement changed. One morning, I saw a toothbrush beside mine. A few days later, there was a spare pair of shoes by the front door. Then came a jacket hanging in the hallway, a coffee mug that always seemed to be in the sink, a phone charger plugged into the wall beside my bed. None of those things seemed important on their own, but together, they were telling a story I wasn't paying attention to. Richard was no longer visiting my house. He was beginning to live in it. The strange thing was that he never demanded anything. He wasn't rude. He wasn't controlling. He didn't arrive with a list of expectations. The changes happened quietly. One evening, he adjusted the thermostat because he thought the house was too cold. Another day, he moved a lamp because he said it would look better on the opposite side of the room. He rearranged tools in my garage to make them more organized. Each change was small, reasonable even, but after several months, I began noticing something that made me uncomfortable. I was no longer making all the decisions in my own home. I found myself asking questions I had never asked before. Would Richard mind if I watched this program? Should I cook something he likes instead? Maybe I'll wait until he's finished using the living room. Those thoughts had never existed during the 12 years I lived alone. My house had always been my sanctuary. Every chair sat exactly where I wanted it. Every room reflected my habits, my routines, my preferences. Now there were negotiations, tiny negotiations, constant negotiations, and they exhausted me. One afternoon, I walked into my kitchen and stopped in the doorway. Nothing dramatic had happened. The counters were clean, the dishes were washed, the room looked almost exactly the same. Yet something felt different. For the first time, I realized I didn't feel completely at home. I remember standing there and thinking a thought that shocked me. I miss my house. The problem was that I was standing inside it when I thought those words. That was the moment I understood something many women learn too late. A home isn't just walls and furniture. It's personal territory. It's where your nervous system relaxes. It's where you don't have to compromise every decision. And when someone moves in, even a kind person, that territory changes. Sometimes it changes so slowly that you don't notice what's happening until the place you once called your refuge starts feeling like a shared space that no longer belongs entirely to you. And for me, that realization was only the beginning. The part that surprised me most wasn't losing space in my house. It was losing myself. I didn't notice it at first because it didn't happen all at once. It happened through 100 small acts that seemed harmless on their own. One evening, I cooked dinner because Richard had a long day. The next evening, I cooked again because I already had the ingredients. A week later, I was planning meals for two without even thinking about it. Soon I was buying his favorite cereal, remembering how he liked his coffee, making sure there were snacks he enjoyed in the pantry. None of this was requested. That is what makes the story so important. Richard never sat me down and said, "Take care of me." He never demanded that I cook. He never asked me to do his laundry. Yet somehow I found myself washing his shirts alongside my own, folding his clothes, picking up after him, making appointments when he forgot, keeping track of things he should have remembered himself. One afternoon, I was standing in the laundry room holding a basket full of his clothes when a memory hit me like a wave. I had done this before, for 32 years of marriage. I had promised myself after becoming a widow that I would never again spend my life taking care of a grown man who was perfectly capable of taking care of himself. And yet there I was, not because Richard was cruel, not because he was lazy, but because I had slipped back into a role that had been familiar for most of my adult life. Women of my generation were taught to anticipate needs, to solve problems before anyone asked, to make life comfortable for everyone around us. We became experts at it. The problem is that those habits don't disappear simply because we grow older. One day I looked around my kitchen and realized something painful. Richard had gained a partner, but I had gained another responsibility. The relationship no longer felt balanced. I wasn't sharing my life with someone. I was managing part of his, and the saddest part was that it happened so gradually I barely noticed the transition. That was the day I finally admitted a truth I had been avoiding. I hadn't found the companion I thought I wanted. I had quietly become a caregiver again. The hardest realization wasn't that I was cooking more, cleaning more, or carrying more responsibility. The hardest realization was seeing where it could all lead. Richard had always been reasonably healthy. He walked every morning. He drove himself everywhere. He rarely complained about aches or pains. But age has a way of reminding us that none of us are as strong as we once were. It started with small things. A missed step getting out of the garage. A dizzy spell after standing up too quickly. A doctor's appointment that led to another doctor's appointment. Nothing serious, at least not at first. But I remember sitting beside him in a waiting room one afternoon and feeling a knot form in my stomach. Not because I was worried about that particular appointment, because I suddenly saw the future. I imagined medication schedules taped to the refrigerator, follow-up visits every few weeks, physical therapy, hospital stays, late-night emergencies. I imagined myself organizing pill boxes, driving to appointments, filling prescriptions, and slowly rearranging my life around someone else's health. The image terrified me, not because Richard was a bad man, not because sick people don't deserve care, but because I had already lived that life once before. I had spent years caring for my husband during difficult periods of our marriage. I knew how easily caregiving could consume every corner of a person's life. Then I thought about my friend Helen. Helen met a wonderful man in her late 60s. They fell in love quickly. He moved into her home after about a year. For a while, they seemed happy. Then his health declined. First came heart problems, then mobility issues, then a series of hospitalizations. Within 3 years, Helen's life had become completely centered around his needs. She stopped traveling, stopped attending book club, stopped seeing friends regularly, stopped doing the things that made her feel alive. One day, she told me something I'll never forget. She said, "I don't know exactly when I stopped being his girlfriend and started being his full-time nurse." That sentence stayed with me, because as I sat beside Richard in that waiting room, I realized how easily the same thing could happen to me. Growing older is difficult enough. I didn't want to spend my remaining years carrying responsibilities I hadn't chosen. And for the first time, I began asking a question I should have asked much earlier. Was this relationship adding freedom to my life or quietly taking it away? For months, I ignored the feeling growing inside me. The discomfort, the tension, the quiet voice that kept whispering, "This isn't what you wanted." I told myself I was being selfish. I told myself every relationship required compromise. I told myself that after 76 years of life, I should be grateful to have someone who cared about me. But gratitude and happiness are not the same thing. One evening, after another dinner that felt more like an obligation than a pleasure, I sat alone on the back porch while Richard watched television inside. The sun was setting. The sky was painted orange and gold. And for the first time, I admitted something I had been afraid to say out loud. I wanted my old life back. Not because I hated Richard, because I missed myself. A few weeks later, I gathered the courage to have the conversation. I remember exactly where we were sitting. The kitchen table, 2 cups of coffee between us. My hands were shaking. "Richard," I said softly, "I think we've made a mistake." The room became very quiet. I explained that I needed more independence, more space, more control over my own life. I told him I thought we would be happier living separately. He didn't yell. He didn't become angry. In some ways, that made it harder. Instead, he looked surprised, then disappointed, then confused. "Why would we go backward?" he asked. Backward. That word stayed with me, because to him, moving out meant losing something. To me, it meant getting something back. Over the following weeks, the conversation repeated itself again and again. He needed more time. He wasn't ready. He wanted us to reconsider. He promised things would improve. Every discussion ended with another delay, another reason to wait, another promise about the future. And slowly I began to feel trapped. Not legally, not financially, emotionally. My own home no longer felt like a place where I could make a simple decision and move forward. Everything required negotiation. Everything required explanation. Everything required permission from someone I had invited into my life. That was when I learned one of the most important lessons of my later years. Getting someone to move in can happen in a single conversation. Getting your independence back can take months, sometimes longer. And the longer you wait, the more difficult it becomes. Because people don't just settle into a house, they settle into a routine, a comfort, a version of life they don't want to leave. And one day I realized something I wish I had understood from the beginning. Opening the door had been easy. Finding the courage to close it again was one of the hardest things I had ever done. When Richard finally moved out, I expected to feel sad. And for a few days, I did. The house felt strangely empty. There was no second coffee cup on the counter, no footsteps in the hallway, no voice coming from the living room. But something else returned almost immediately. Peace. A deep, quiet peace I hadn't realized was missing. The first Saturday after he left, I woke up naturally. No television, no competing schedule, no discussion about what we should do that day. I made breakfast when I felt hungry. I read a book for 2 hours without interruption. I sat in my favorite chair by the window and watched the rain move across the yard. And for the first time in a long time, I felt completely relaxed. That's when I realized what I had truly lost. It wasn't money. It wasn't space in the closet. It wasn't even the freedom to make small decisions. It was the ability to belong entirely to myself. For years, I thought living alone was the problem. I thought the goal was to fill the empty spaces in my life. But age has a way of teaching difficult truths. Sometimes, an empty space is not a problem that needs solving. Sometimes it's where peace lives. Living alone wasn't always easy. There were quiet evenings. There were lonely moments. There were days when I wished someone else was there. But loneliness came and went. The loss of freedom stayed every single day. At 76, I finally understood something I wish I had known much sooner. Being alone and being unhappy are not the same thing. And sometimes, the most valuable thing a woman can protect is not a relationship. It's her independence, her routine, her peace of mind, and the life she worked so hard to build. People sometimes assume that because of what happened with Richard, I've given up on love. I haven't. At 76, I still enjoy companionship. I still enjoy meaningful conversations over dinner, afternoon walks, and having someone to share life's small moments with. What I've given up is the belief that love requires sharing a roof. For years, society taught us that a successful relationship follows a specific path. Dating, moving in together, combining lives completely. But at this stage of life, I've learned that there are other ways to love. Today, I have a very different set of boundaries. No one has a key to my house. No one receives mail at my address. No one keeps a permanent drawer in my bedroom. Those rules aren't walls designed to keep people out. They're boundaries designed to protect the life I've built. One of the happiest couples I know lives 4 blocks apart. They've been together for nearly 8 years. They travel together, celebrate holidays together, support each other through life's challenges. And at the end of the evening, each goes home to their own bed, their own routine, and their own peace. Some people call it living apart together. I call it freedom with companionship, because love doesn't have to cost you your independence. It doesn't have to require sacrificing your routines, your space, or your identity. At 76, I've finally learned that the healthiest relationship isn't the one where 2 lives completely merge. It's the one where 2 people can love each other deeply while still remaining fully themselves. If there's one thing I hope you remember from my story, it's this. Don't let loneliness convince you to give away something you've spent a lifetime building. At 76, I've learned that peace is not something to take for granted. Neither is freedom. Neither is the ability to wake up each morning and live according to your own rhythm. For a long time, I believed that having someone beside me would make life easier. What I discovered instead was that the wrong arrangement can take more than it gives. Today, I still enjoy friendship. I still believe in love. I still believe that meaningful companionship can enrich our lives at any age. But I also believe that a woman should never have to sacrifice her independence to keep a relationship. My house is quiet again. My mornings belong to me again. And perhaps most importantly, I belong to myself again. If you agree that peace, freedom, and self-respect become even more valuable after 70, leave a 1-inch the comments below. And if this story spoke to your heart, please subscribe to the channel and join us for more honest conversations about aging, relationships, and living well in the years that matter most. Thank you for spending this time with me. I'll see you in the next story.